Take one.
Hello, everybody, and welcome again to the StudioRatHQ podcast. This is our 5th podcast. As you can see, we look the same as on the 4th because we're talking in some ways about the same artist. Our last podcast was on Sepultura, and this is on Soulfly.
Yes,
A few
awesome.
bits of business to take care of. We are spreading out further on the web as much as possible. We have a Facebook page, www.facebook.com/StudioRatHQ. We have a website which is has some features, which is www.StudioRatHQ.com. One thing that you will find on there are the MP3 files of these webcasts, no video, but just the audio, where you can go and listen on the website page. We're also on Podomatic, StudioRatHQ, and you can download our MP3s so that you can take it with you and listen to it on the road or wherever you are.
And I'd like to say real quick, too,
yeah,
none
sure.
of this would be relevant or possible if it wasn't for Richard.
Right.
So thank you again.
Well, what I bring in here is a mixture of fact and fiction.
Yes, of course.
More fact than fiction, but you never.
Well, my memory of events 20 years ago is about as good as it was of events yesterday.
Right.
Not very good.
I don't know about that. Some of this stuff's been incredibly detailed.
Yeah, right.
This-
you like
this-
Also, we
naming
should
off serial
we have
numbers on
not
tubes.
introduced ourselves yet.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're right. Sorry about that. My name is Stephen Couch, and I am here with Derek Jablonski, and of course Richard Kaplan, as Derek mentioned. Derek and I never knew each other, but we were from the same hometown in Northwest Florida called Pensacola. So shout out to Pensacola. We met each other out here in L.A., and we were working with Richard on a DVD-related product, and we just kind of sat between takes and had kind of war stories about our experiences as engineers, as musicians, as people making records and music, and
growing up in it. Yeah, just being totally
Right.
consumed by audio our entire lives, right?
there is nothing else except audio.
That's, yeah. 'cause
Also,
it's-
Stephen and I had worked for a couple of years on what was my swan song project. After I retired, I was pulled out to produce 165 previously unreleased Bing Crosby songs.
Yeah.
Totally.
And Stephen was my digital buddy,
digital
without
buddy.
which it would have never happened.
Brought Richard further
so
into the world of digital.
We have some histories together,
Right.
interlinking, and we decided that this might just be of some interest to hear some of the stories that go behind some of these things.
Yeah.
Well, that,
Huge
as Derek
albums.
says, that has a lot to do with you, is because there was a lot of interest on the internet about how did Indigo Ranch make records, how did they produce sounds, and here Richard, with Derek and I assisting, are explaining how he did it. And we've done mostly heavy metal or new metal records.
That'll change, though. 'Cause
That'll
we did
change.
all kinds of music.
Right,
I
and
got to be honest. I'm looking forward to Lenny Kravitz's album. I know I've been saying this since the
Yep,
beginning, but I'm a huge fan. You know,
Right,
That was a
Me too.
great
Totally.
album, and
I'm a fan
Oh, yeah.
of just about everybody that I worked with,
And-
and we're you know, we started off on this heavy metal tangent, but be forewarned, audience, we are going to cover all forms of music at one point or another.
Neil
Yeah,
Diamond's, Neil Young's,
Kenny
Neil,
G. What could be more
Kenny
different than
Neil.
Kenny G? You know, he's opposite of heavy metal. And
Yeah.
as a viewer or listener, if you're listening to this, you can go to the StudioRatHQ YouTube page, where I created a short video with the client list, not a complete client list, but a fairly significant one. And it's just a rolling scroll of all the clients. So if you're like, well, I don't like what they're talking about, keep coming back though, because it will change. And if you're a metal fan, keep coming back, because even though we're currently focused in the 90s, there were other metal acts recorded, and So it's going to be about music, about production, about musicians, about musicianship, and that brings us to Soulfly. And we just spoke about Sepultura Roots, which we all just thought was a great record. And the thing that we wanted to talk about with this was not necessarily what microphones were used on the drums, and we can go into that on Soulfly, but rather here was a major international touring act.
Huge, yeah.
That disintegrated
within
kind of in
what,
a
1 year,
year.
basically.
Yeah.
It, more than disintegrated, it imploded.
Okay. Well, that's where I think we ought to talk about is that you, Richard, observed because he came right back to you. He came right back to Indigo Ranch,
Mm-hmm.
and you had
And
seen
asked me to co-produce the Soulfly album with
right,
him,
post
which was
implosion.
to me a great honor.
Yeah. So what? Let's talk about that. I mean, everybody knows if you're a fan of Sepultura or metal, you know the kind of public persona, and we're not going to dish dirt. So if you want dirt, you're going to have to go somewhere else. We're just going to talk about what happened, and what happened for somebody like Richard, who was in the eye of the storm when this implosion took place. So let's begin with Max coming back to Indigo. What happened?
He, although the group Sepultura had imploded and gone its own way without Max, with his blessing, he was a musician that wasn't done playing. And he had a lot of ideas that were different than the Sepultura material. Because, I mean, when you get to the, gosh, this is going to sound like a pun, root of Sepultura, it has to do with sepulcher or death or grave,
Right.
in their native tongue. And
Portuguese.
yeah,
That's a tough
and
Totally.
most of the songs, which Max was the basic contributor of the lyrics and much of the music, were related to the concept of Sepultura. And Max had a lot more going on in him, and Soulfly was almost the opposite. You know, it was like a reinvention, a coming to life for this musician who had been pigeonholed into doing Sepultura music, into doing Soulfly music and letting it loose. And he came in with a new band, new characters. Roy on drums, an incredible drummer, endorsed by DW Drum Workshop, with a completely different kind of kit than Sepultura had used, but picked for the reason of that here was a drummer who had as much power and imagination as Sepultura's drummer Igor, Max's brother, and was able to transmit that power to the music. A new second guitar player, Marcelo.
Right. Rizzo, I think, is his last.
I mean, excuse me, bass player, Marcelo, who was able to keep the bottom end of the music as full as Sepultura had, because that was one of the things about Sepultura and the, shall we call the 90s Ross Robinson and Indigo Ranch barrage of heavy albums, was that incredible bottom end. And he was able to keep that going, as was their new guitarist. And here, Max, of course, still playing a 4-string guitar, but with these new types of songs. And, Gloria backing him up, and, a new child having been added to the Cavalera family. And, they come to Indigo as much a family band as any we've ever seen.
Well, I think one of the things I just wanted to kind of get into was that if you're a fan and specifically fans of heavy metal or heavy music, they're particularly
This guy.
devoted. They well, we're devoted to the bands, and then they all of a sudden break up. You're not inside that organization, so you're like, oh, somebody's being a jerk or somebody
Right.
screwed up or whatever, and yet there you were, Richard, inside the organization.
Hmm.
What kind of pressures was he dealing with? Was he, exacerbated by it? Was he?
He was dealing with a lot of pressure, but fortunately for Max, Max is what I think of as a real musician. There's a lot of people who play because they feel they've got to be famous or play because of various other ego issues. Max was what I think of as a musician in the traditional sense. You play music because you love it and you have fun playing music,
Yeah.
and it's the music is the object rather
Right.
than
The fame. Yeah.
rather than the music business.
Yeah. Totally.
And a lot of bands that came through, even very famous ones, were wrapped up in the music business. Max was wrapped up in music and the love of music and the love of what he could put out on a record, and the fans followed him from one extreme to the other as they went from Sepultura
Mhm.
to this new Soulfly entity.
With an artist like him, you were saying how he went right into Soulfly, but a true artist, someone who is really who has a true love for music and stuff, they're going to keep going. They're not
Yes.
just gonna stop. And for a lot of us, being musicians and stuff, it's not like that's what I always try to tell people. Like out here in Los Angeles, people say, "Well, what do you do?" Blah blah blah, and I say I'm a musician, and I almost feel kind of like, "Oh, I'm a musician.
I also do this
I'm
and
another
that."
one of those." Right,
Don't
but I
quit
also
your day
do this
job.
and that.
Yeah, exactly.
But the fact is, if you're true to it, it's just like my buddies who are in acting. They're going to acting school their whole lives. A lot of celebrities do that because it's just like it's a passion, it's a way of life. It's not for, maybe at one time it was for the girls and the money or whatever, whoever. But it's not, it's not all of
Well,
it.
it's
Is Steven frozen on your screen?
It looks like he has, yes.
my camera is working. I see myself fine here, guys.
You do? Because you're frozen on my screen.
Poke him over here.
Hello, everybody.
Does that matter?
Well, we'll have to edit this out, obviously, and start again, but we can edit it. Can you see me now?
Nope.
All right. That could be on your end, Richard. I have a feeling
I
you've
see
got.
it too.
Okay, so it is on my end. All right, hold on, guys.
Sure. It's just one of those little quirks of Skype.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not going to hurt the video call up to this point, and we can keep going from here. But if you can,
Does anybody have an active timer of how long this call is? Can anybody see?
We're at 18 minutes now.
Yeah, we don't want to cut this.
Well, we started
Oh.
about 3 minutes in, so I can go back and edit this if you want. We'll go ahead and kill the call and pick up from here.
All
start
right,
over,
all right.
and let's
No,
just
no,
pick
no.
up where we are. We can
Yeah.
use what we have
Yes.
up to this point.
All right, what are we talking about?
I was
somebody
just talking about the length of an artist, and if you're a true artist, you're gonna stay with it. It's
Okay.
not for the
Let's
girl.
reinitiate the call
Okay.
before we go any further.
Okay.
All right, nobody
Oh
forget
wait,
this
you're
stuff.
back. You're moving now, so we can just go on from here. Okay, Derek, go ahead with, and you can just cut to this point.
Okay. So what I was saying, let me start the question over. All right. I don't even know if it was a question. Okay.
Oh
here we
wait,
go.
now I see myself, guys. Sorry.
So, the true artist, you're gonna stick with it long term. And I think it's really great that he moved from one to the next, and he's still going. And I think that's really an important factor as being a true artist. Actors or musicians. Actors still go to acting classes their whole life, even when they're famous and on stage and scream. As well
Yeah.
as musicians, we continue to build and grow, even if at the moment we're not on tour or whatever. And I think Max is the form of a true musician.
And
Absolutely, and it shows his love of the music that he uh, continued on without even a glitch.
Hmm.
Just went right ahead because he loved the music. Many bands, when they break up, that's the end of a guy's career.
Yep.
Yeah.
Max had already accomplished more than most musicians will ever accomplish. Didn't really need to, in terms of musical success, uh, go on any further than he
Hmm.
had already gone. Yet he comes back and reinvents the wheel.
I think that's an important point because, again, I stress public persona and what the public sees as compared to what's behind the scenes. And
Yeah.
that's what we're talking about. We're talking about what happened behind the scenes. And if you were a fan of Sepultura, who knows what information you received that it was
Right.
all Max's fault or maybe there was some other
Yeah.
reason.
That's
And here is where something of that magnitude, one of your favorite bands, has called it, at least in the way that you know and recognize and love, has said this no longer works.
I've
And
seen that happen in several bands um, during my career, including the Moody Blues.
hmm
And I'd have to look at it in the same way that I look at auto insurance in California. It's a no fault situation. Um, it doesn't
oh man.
matter whose fault it was or who said what or what happened. It's a matter of did you guys pick up the pieces and by your love of music continue on into some other endeavor where you could express yourself, where you
right,
could have fun. Uh, when music becomes strictly work,
Yeah.
I think it
That's
loses all its charm, both to
absolutely.
the musician and the listener.
well, I think
And
it's also, unless you're just this superstar or some kind of savant, the public also recognizes that there's not that vitality, there's not that energy in it, whatever the genre, and artists,
Let's be honest. Musicians, though, in general, are pretty emotional people.
of
You
course,
know, we're
part
we're
of the,
pretty we're
yeah,
pretty
and pretty highly charged and egotistical.
right. Well, yeah, but I mean, a lot of us are self-loathing people, and that's why we're perfectionists when writing. We'll write it over and over
Yeah,
and over.
yeah,
yeah.
And being overly emotional people, I think tempers flare. My longest term band, I was in a band for 8 years, and with a lot of the same guys. There was a few lineup changes, but the main songwriters. And you can go to practice and not talk for a week. You
right.
know, and then next week you're the best buddies in the world, both sleeping on the floor at the hotel, just talking smack. And you just don't know. It's a really high octane relationship. And my drummer from that band was quoted in this paper saying, a band is like a marriage. It's like I'm married to four other guys. So
Yeah.
there's always drama, but we're a family and we're pulling together to do one thing. You know.
Not to mention the equipment.
Oh
Yeah.
It's the old
gosh.
story about, if I brought all my guitars home at once, my wife would leave. You know, it's,
That's
Totally.
something I wonder what over the years, like what your wife would have has thought about all of your equipment, because you have so much, and once you had so much more with Indigo, it's like I've been to your place and it's like, wow, like that right there, that whole row of amps, that could have been a vacation to Europe. And like
Right. Equipment
that
Central.
that could have been a Mercedes, but instead it's a bunch of tube amps and like.
We'll try, Richard. We'll try and upload the Flickr link. It's too long and convoluted to say on on
right.
video, but maybe we can post it maybe on the Facebook page or something. And this is
And on Studio Rat HQ, which is StudioRatHQ
For
dot
headquarters.
com.
right. And there's a story even why it's called that. Studio Rat was when Richard and I were first talking about putting this out there. And I was saying, well, let's take this to the public. Let's have people hear your story. And you go, what you said to me? You said, I'm just an old studio rat. What? Why do people want to hear this? And I said, studio rat. That's an interesting term. And so HQ stands for headquarters. And
Yeah. My instructors at Full Sail were all old studio rats. I mean,
right,
these
right,
guys are all retired, and they had moved to Florida to live, to stretch a dollar, and they had picked up this job making, I couldn't imagine much, but there, but still, like they were old studio rats too. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you guys are the ones that painted the pictures for us. You laid the roads and you taught us how to use the equipment, and it goes down the line. The same thing that I think Steven and I feel like we hope that we can pass on
Hmm.
is how to use a compressor properly, or hey, this
Use
system
your ears.
like don't run 48 phantom volts to a ribbon mic. Like common sense stuff, little things.
Mhm.
Phasing issues. These are stuff that we hope to keep passing on to our friends and in the studio and
Us old guys had to learn all that stuff the hard
hard way,
way.
right? Right.
You know,
Well, that's what I'm saying.
oops,
No, I
guess this
agree.
mic will never work again.
Richard has been one of my mentors as a musician, songwriter, and engineer throughout the years. But and I was also originally trained in London with a classical uh, engineer, and he,
How was that?
yeah, he's. I don't know what I haven't heard from him in a long time, but he was in London. I think he even moved. He was Austrian,
Austrian.
and not Australian,
Oh, I'm
Austrian,
sorry,
They
as
all say.
Austrian.
Österreich, and
Okay, yeah, I've got to get those. Yeah, I got to get those
uh,
together.
he's a great guy named Nick Christina. If you're out there, maybe you see this, don't hesitate to send me a line. But that's the interesting thing is about also Richard. You had a producer's credit on this record, and that's different than an engineering credit.
Well, I got credited as both at certain points. I know on allmusic.com, I'm credited as producer, co-producer, and engineer.
Hmm.
On the first issuance by Roadrunner of the album, I only got an engineering credit. And on the second issuance of it, I did get a production credit. Um, my and again, here's one of those. If you're out there, we were just looking through Wikipedia and All Music and stuff, and I see that the album did go gold. And not to complain, but I never got my gold copy.
Yeah, where is
And
that? That's Roadrunner
anybody
Records.
who's responsible for
Yeah,
sending out gold
send
records
this man
would like
another.
to indulge me, I certainly put my heart and soul into
Yeah,
that.
and
Well,
he,
Soulfly.
and he
explain.
already has 60 gold and platinum. Oh God, 100
Well,
gold and
yeah,
platinum
but
records.
that
So
one's
one
missing.
more. Well, that
You know,
album.
Explain to the viewers and
along
the
with the
listeners.
one from Kenny G, who promised me in person that he was going to take care of it next week, and that was more than 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, this album went gold in 2005. It said that's
It took a long
that's a
time,
lot of
Right.
years.
Yeah.
but
Slow
I'd
build.
I'd still like a copy.
I bought this album when it came out, this Soulfly album, because at that time, I was big into Limp Bizkit and the Deftones. Deftones, still, man, still one of my favorite. I keep
All of
saying
which
that.
we worked with at Indigo.
I
Yeah,
got
yeah.
a lot of
Deftones were out there
favorites.
too. Yeah.
Deftones blew me away as a kid, and I saw
I'll-
that they were on this album, Chino was, and I was like, what?
Well, what a guitarist!
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you you can't even imagine a guy that size.
Oh
His
yeah.
guitar looks like a little stick in his hand,
Oh yeah,
and
Dino Kazarian, yeah.
he can play like nobody else in the world.
Are we talking about Dino of
Dino
Fear
from Fear
Factory,
Factory.
or of Deftones?
Of Fear Factory.
Oh, Fear
Dino,
Factory.
yeah.
Yeah. Of course, yeah. Okay.
Sorry, Dino, Chino.
Yeah,
Why couldn't
Chino's of Deftones,
Yeah.
and I
Okay.
used to share a rehearsal.
Okay, I know them
space
both.
with Stephen Carpenter.
With
Or
Stephen
Steph,
Carpenter,
or-
yeah.
yeah. That's right.
He
I was there that
And
night.
we worked
One
worked
night.
with both. We worked with Fear
Yeah,
Factory.
you did. But
We worked
Steph
with that-
rehearsed
that-
right down the hall in another band, and we used to hang out in between.
I think
rehearsals.
some of the nights we were filming the tutorial with Richard, he was
Right,
in
right.
the room, couple rooms over, because we kept stopping because the music was so
Incredibly
heavy
loud.
and so loud. We had to keep
Good point.
cutting. And I remember going, "Can he hear anything? Poor guy, can he hear anything anymore?"
He was incredibly nice when we would go out and have conversations in between
Yeah.
rehearsals.
Yeah.
My band and his band, and
You know, and a lot of these bands were so, shall I
Connected.
say, incestuous in
Yeah.
terms of,
Yeah.
that they would do guest appearances on each other's
Mhm.
albums. They would show up for the parties and the barbecues. They would come to the listening parties because these guys not only knew each other and respected each other in a very competitive field where you would think that it would be a battle rather than a friendship.
Mm-hmm.
And these bands, you think of that heavy metal death image and toughness and stuff, and most of these guys were really just great musicians, and that happened to be what they played.
Yeah. Well, it's just like you did some I think some tracking, or you did something for the band Snot before Get Some came out. And also, can you believe this? One of my favorite bands. So
Small world.
So Snot, the singer, passed away in a car wreck. Like, gosh, how long is it? It's been since '98 now. It seems.
Yeah.
Man, it's time flies.
15 years.
But when they did the compilation album, basically to honor and tribute him, if you look at the people who were on the album, it was guys from System of a Down, Deftones, Ozzy, like all these people, like Incubus and stuff. You don't realize that these guys all play the same scene. They all toured together. They played Ozfest. They did this. They did that. You know, they ate each other's peanut butter and probably slept in the hotels and drank each other's beers. And so it's
And when we did little solo album bits and stuff like that, we did an album with Monkey from Korn, and he brought in players from all of those bands, System of a Down and so forth, to play on his not famous band album, Cuff, which is what spelled backwards, and some great music.
Well, it's funny because we were just talking about.
You're frozen again.
Just let it go.
Okay.
It's funny because we were talking about that rehearsal space where I played with a band, and I talked about going back in there. Steph was down the hall, and then right across the hall from me was the bass player of System of a Down, and he had a separate project, as you said, maybe the non-famous one, but he was there quite a bit, and he loved playing with those guys, and
you know what we need? We need like a We Are the World All-Star metal tribute anthem, and then like all these guys can come out from these different bands and just do like a mega song that saves the world from itself.
Because these guys really, for the most part, really have their heart in the right place, even though they've got this tough exterior and this heavy metal persona and this goth costuming, or sometimes even more bizarre. And underneath, when I meet these guys, especially at a place like Indigo, they're just people. Because Indigo was the great divider. People would come up there with a big attitude, and by the time they left, they realized there was nobody to pull that crap on. It wasn't like being at a studio in Hollywood where you had all of your groupies and fan club and stuff coming by. Here was a studio where you either had to be a cool guy or you were left out of everything.
Yeah.
I interned for a minute at a studio here in Hollywood, North Hollywood, that Linkin Park had did their last album at, and I remembered when I was there. This is when I first came out here. And I remember I was in the studio, and they came in, and like the guitar player, I think it was one of the guitar players, had come in like his private, I don't know, Escalade or whatever, with his security guard, and then set outside of one of the main rooms when he was in there tracking. He had his security guard sitting up there, and I was just sitting there. I'm like, I was working in the studio at that time, and I was just thinking, that's so strange. Like we're in a gated complex where no one's getting in, and there's a security guard outside the door. I'm like, is someone gonna mob these guys, or I don't.
Some of it's just probably contractual obligations. Some of it's
true.
Some of it's artistic eccentricity. You have to allow.
We had to turn down bands at Indigo that wanted to come in during the initial rap phases when things were going terribly wrong in terms of killings and stuff like that.
Oh, gosh,
and we had bands that wanted to come in
and you're like,
who wanted to put in huge security systems and metal detectors and armed guards.
Wow.
And I just wouldn't have it.
Yeah.
That's
you're turning down you know,
Not
an eighth of $1 million worth of recording expenses
yeah.
because that just wasn't Indigo.
True, to be honest, because I know some people might listen to this who enjoy hip hop and rap and everything, and that's fine. I don't mean to be disrespectful,
I
but
do too.
that
Yeah.
is yeah. I mean that's yeah. We're not just metal dudes or anything. You know, we don't just listen to metal, but that is a very interesting time and thing to think about because you know people do get killed in the metal scene. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
look at Dimebag Darrell. He got shot down on stage for what? For what? I mean, why did they? That's such
Literally, from what I read, a fan was angry.
that he
This is
yeah.
what I'm talking about: public persona versus what happened behind the scenes. A fan was angry because
It's
they thought
heartbreaking.
Dimebag was responsible for Pantera breaking up.
Right, and it's heartbreaking. I mean, I know
Now,
that we're
is that what privately happened behind the scenes? We have
probably
no idea.
right.
But here we're talking with somebody in a situation not as drastic as
hmm
somebody being homicidal about it, but here was Richard behind the scenes, and
Well, in the rap game, they were glorifying it though, killing each other off,
yeah.
and it was a way to make money
Yeah.
off of each other, and that's different. I don't think they ever did that in metal, but then again, you know, don't quote me because I know there's always stories and myths and legends.
I'm more of a
Public
one-on-one.
feuds.
I'm more of a one-on-one guy who wants to get to know these people as the people that they are,
Sure.
and in so doing, have a good time making the music. Um, and there were bands that I worked with that were so serious. You know, there wasn't a smile crack, there wasn't a laugh or a good time. And then there were bands that would come in where all they wanted to do was to
Have
you
fun.
know show
Horseplay.
off what great musicians they
Uh,
were, play their songs, eat good food, have some parties
yeah.
and stuff like that. And that's what I was really in for, was the people,
Yeah.
the music. If it didn't happen in Indigo, it was probably going to happen somewhere else. It probably wouldn't have sounded the same, but
Yep.
I'm not going to say it would have sounded better or worse. It would have just been different. But we had many an artist come, especially some of the real famous artists that we had during the '80s, who would come in thinking, that they were, their what didn't smell, and after a day or two of
Feet.
parading around the studio, not being sociable or friendly or something like that,
Right.
we would break that persona so that they could be a part of the gang that represented Indigo, and it would be like a life-changing experience for them, where they didn't have to put on that act.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of what this whole subject is that as Derek, you mentioned earlier, this kind of anguish and angst inside of a lot of course, popular rock, and people are attracted to that kind of tragedy.
Yeah.
Yet the process of making that deep, heartfelt music might not necessarily be a tragic one. It could have been something where that's what's inside the person's soul, but the process of recording and producing it is not the same as the output. And
Yeah. I will
that's-
say I will
Go
say
ahead.
being on this side, and I know I'm not totally on this side, but working in studios as well as post production as well as music production, I'm obviously you're back. So I'm not a celebrity, but by any means, but working with them on a personal level, like what Richard was just saying, you do get to know them as who they are, because the popular and public persona is entirely different, and you always kind of wonder, like, is the story true? Are things
Yes.
really happening? I was working at a post production studio last summer, and I'll leave the celebrity nameless, but there was nameless, but there was a big celebrity in there, and I was sitting in the lobby with him, and we were talking, and he was about to go in, and we were going to do a session, and we're sitting there watching TMZ together. TMZ, which is, if anybody doesn't know, I'm sure they do, it's an exploitive TV show that is moderately interesting. Don't get me
gossip.
wrong. It
It's
is funny.
gossip.
But it's basically just TV gossip. And I'm sitting there
Yeah.
watching it with him, and I looked over at him, and I said, are you really watching this? And he was like, yeah. And I said, so you don't think it's weird that we just watched a segment with you in it? And he's like, nah. He's like, man, they're going to say what they want. And I said,
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's true. That's true.
TMZ stands for 30 Mile Zone, which
Yeah.
is
Get out of LA. Yep.
well, production credits were related to whether or not if you worked within 30 Mile Zone, you got paid a certain amount as compared to not, and so that mostly had to do with pay rates, and of course Hollywood was in the 30 Mile Zone, so that's why it's TMZ. But the
Back to Soulfly, I
Yeah,
wanted
exactly.
to
Sorry about
mention
We got a little off there, like we
yeah, we
always
did.
do.
one thing there, and that was we used a couple of unique pieces of equipment on that album that, due to the fact that I had both engineering and production privileges, I was able to bring in a couple of unusual things. One of which was, and we had used this on the Sepultura album also, was the Fuzzrite made by Sanner, and this is one that I hand modified the circuit of so that it had a more aggressive fuzz tone to it. Also, we used the Apollo, which was made by Shinai of Japan. As you can see, there's not a lot of controls on here. There's an on-off switch, and on the side there's a expander and an off switch. But the really unique item, we talked about how on almost all of these bands that I would set up a small amp somewhere hidden from the prying eyes of anybody who was trying to figure out how we were getting our sound or what was going on, especially when a band had big endorsements and was required to use certain pieces of equipment.
Absolutely.
And for Soulfly, one of my secret weapons was this very rare Zeus guitar amp. Now,
who makes that?
I see it's about the size of 2 packs of cigarettes,
Right.
and has a speaker here in the middle and 3 knobs, which are basically just preamp gain and tone and volume.
Where would you find that? Where did you find it?
I don't know. I've got 2 pedals that are made by Zeus. They're they're built like a truck. They're in heavy metal boxes, and I used this amp because it was so different than what they were using. The big super heavy metal amps, and this was like the little Soulfly buzzing amp going on in the background, but ended up being a good part of the tone of some of the songs. And I found that to be the case in most everything that we ever did. And this will also get posted as a picture where you can actually see the detail in it. That the necessity of not just having the biggest, loudest amp to be a heavy metal band, but maybe having the smallest, tiniest, most unheard of amp as a mate to that amp is what gives that enormous sound.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that. Well, I guess I can on the album, but love to hear that. Like, bring over a guitar and plug into it. That's pretty wild.
It's this thing sounds.
What size cone on that? What's
4 inches or something.
Inch.
Yeah.
Inch
Oh my gosh.
and a quarter.
That's crazy.
It's the smallest speaker I've ever seen. It's almost like a joke, or a gag amp, except that it's so well made and reasonably powerful enough that you can actually get some distortion to that speaker. Although the speaker is only a 1 or 2 inch speaker, I can't imagine it being any bigger than that. As I'm looking at it, you are able to really drive this thing.
Yeah.
And that's again, I want guitarists and engineers and producers to know that some of the biggest sounds come from the smallest
Hmm.
amps, or from a marriage of a huge amp with a small amp.
Well,
And once again in my career, Soulfly was no different. I utilized that marriage to produce some of those big guitar sounds. And this was one of the few opportunities where I had to try what was the smallest amp in my arsenal, rather than usually as a secondary amp, I would use something like a K or a Silvertone or something like that with an 8-inch speaker. But to jump down to a 1.5-inch or 2-inch speaker was a real departure even for me.
Hmm.
what did you mic that with?
Uh,
A tiny, tiny mic.
Yeah,
Just kidding. A little Royer.
surprisingly,
lavalier mic.
surprisingly, I I believe I used one of our more expensive mics, a U67,
Oh
Nice.
yeah.
because it really gave the fullness and presence of this. And I mic'd it a few inches from the what looks like a guitar pedal amp, um, so that you got a tiny bit, not just of the cone rattling away, but of the whole presence of this thing.
Awesome.
Hmm. That's
No,
really neat.
that's
But with a high quality mic, where you could get some low end and you could get some extreme bite from it, and this
Mhm.
amp definitely had a stinger.
yeah.
Man.
I love doing that as well, trying to find unusual guitar tones that you might not be used to, and then always also trying to set up the classic guitar tone, whether it be cleaner.
And sometimes difficult with heavy metal bands because they often are either contractually um,
Yep. Endorsed.
linked
Endorsing,
Absolutely.
with an
endorsing. Yeah,
Absolutely.
endorsed manufacturer,
right.
or their ego is, I've got the best guitar tone in the world and it's louder than, mine goes up to 11, uh, kind of concept. And
Spinal
to,
Tap.
without their knowledge, put a little tiny amp in the chain, and not, they didn't even have to know where the sound was coming from. That when they heard it out the speakers in the control room and you mixed the right proportion of the two, and they'd say, that's it, you got it.
Did you ever
And they thought what you were
That's my
doing
sound.
was merely manipulating their big amp.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Did it's happened to me a bunch, so I guess I'll ask both of you guys. Did a guitarist or another musician ever come in and said, "This is my tone," and you're just like, "Can we make changes to it so that it sounds
Yes.
tape?"
Dude, when I was young,
As an engineer
I was
and
that guy.
Indigo as a studio, regardless of who was engineering, most of the bands that came in and most of the producers that came in were in there not because this is where the record company had assigned them, because generally uh, we avoided A&R men and record company schmoozing,
Yeah.
and it was so far
Get out of
away
here.
that it was inconvenient for them to usually drive up there.
Hmm.
They came there because they had heard an album or had had friends that had recorded there that got sounds that were different than what they were hearing anywhere else. So they were all but too anxious to have us try new things,
Well,
even if even if sometimes we had to hide from them what we were doing.
yeah, that's the kind of point I'm making there, is that it was still hidden from them,
Well,
and
I'll tell you as a young person, because I started playing
And
a band.
oftentimes they knew what we, you'd get a guy in there who was like an equipment buff who was interested in. Now wait a minute, I've mic'd this guitar
yeah, yeah,
6 ways to Sunday and never gotten this sound. What are you doing?
right, right,
And sometimes if if I felt close enough personally to the guy that I could disclose that, I'd show him what I was doing.
hmm,
Hmm.
But most of the time, not. Most guys had a real, and most musicians have a real attachment to and personal identification with their sound.
Yeah.
And of course, because they've worked for years trying to hone in on something that is unique to them and works on stage and has been, what brought them to where they are. And they don't want it messed with a lot of times.
Yeah. Well,
No, I brought you into a studio where I was recording, and you even went, Richard. You were like, "What are you doing with that tone there?" And I had put an eventide through it. You remember that?
I remember that
At
too.
Jeff's studio
In the valley.
in the valley, and I agree. It's always trying to find just something slightly different,
Yeah, and nothing hurts more than an engineer that hates your tone. I just wanted to say that because when I was
Oh, okay.
when I was young, I started playing about 14. Started actually playing in bars at 15. And as you know, Stephen, in the South,
Yeah.
that you can play in bars at 15 years old.
Yeah, yeah,
They
of
didn't
course.
care.
Right,
I remember
right.
getting handed beer at like barely 18. Like, here you go, drink this, and I was like, I'm 6. No, but
Yeah. It's
you know,
not on the tab. It's part of your free.
right. And
Yeah.
I remember going into a studio that I sure hope isn't there anymore because the engineer used to smoke and drink and just leave his beers up on the console. It was somewhere in Pensacola anyway. I'll leave it blank.
Okay.
But once again, if
There's
you hear
only a
this, you
few
know
of
who you are.
Yeah.
But I remember the engineer saying, "All right, so who's got the good tone and who's got the shitty tone?" And I was looking at my other guitar player and I was like, "Uh-oh." And he looks at and the guitar player points to me, and I'm like, oh, "Yeah, I mean, nothing hurts more than going, your tone sucks."
Right.
And since then, I have been fighting with myself over tones. I bought an 11 rack, which is right here below me, and can't see it, but it's down here. And
Okay.
it's wild. I connect that. I set, I send it through my Mesa. I try to mix signals. You're always kind of fighting for a tone, just something, that makes you unique. And that
I don't know if
11
it's a
rack is very
I don't know if it's a
helpful.
fight or a quest.
Yeah, no,
I think
It's both.
all levels of guitarists are constantly searching for. The only person I can not person
Well, it's one of the few things that every
defines you.
genre
Yeah.
and every band has a guitarist. I mean, it's more like an oddity to find a band that doesn't have a guitarist, whether it be a mariachi band or a heavy metal band
or
or
a heavy
a
mariachi
classic
band.
rock band or a cocktail band. Guitar is just one of the common instruments, and finding your place in that huge. I mean, there's more guitarists than you can shake a stick at,
Yeah.
and
Oh my gosh,
good
yeah.
guitarists. I mean, really good.
Especially out
I
here.
played in a band through high school and college, and I thought I was pretty good. And I realized when I got into producing and engineering
Yep.
that I could practice 8 hours a day for the rest of my life and not be as good as the worst guitarist I was working with.
Oh,
Yeah.
come on.
And that's a fact. I did not have what it took to jump to the level of the players that I was working with.
Well, the guys on the Soulfly album, I'm just wondering because Sepultura was formed in Brazil in the '80s and '84, and then in '97 he formed Soulfly in Arizona. So here in the States, I'm not
That's
familiar.
where Gloria and Max live.
Okay,
That's where their family is.
What, Phoenix?
hmm
Okay.
I'm not really
They're-
familiar with where
they're-
those guys came from before joining Soulfly, but I mean, gosh, going from one great band to the next, I mean, he could really recruit some these guys are heck of players,
Yeah,
heck of just great players, and
Yeah.
it's something that I don't know. I don't. I
Where
don't
do
know,
you
I
find them, you mean?
Yeah, like
Well, the thing is,
Steve, you and I, we
yeah.
play with a lot of people here in LA, and we're always on the lookout because as soon as people
Right.
get with you, start playing, they drop out.
The thing,
So it's
and
like, where do you find these guys?
There's no shortage of musicians.
That's
yeah, those
right.
guys were on the
But putting
payroll.
together a chemistry that works is really the secret to it. Because there's a zillion great guitarists, there's a zillion great drummers, there's a zillion great bass players, there's a zillion great singers, but of them, it's like the number that actually make it big time is more comparable to the number of people who get hit by lightning.
Yeah.
Shark
You know,
attacks.
it's finding a chemistry in a band that works, finding songs that exploit that chemistry to the public, that makes each band that becomes famous so unique and so wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the thing about the you know, I was talking with somebody else about this recently, is that there's a big difference if you are a songwriter or a composer, or you want to put a band together and you quote unquote have a vision, and it's all about sort of cooperation amongst the musicians. You can't
Collaboration.
well, you can't bring in a bunch of people and not pay them and then just demand that your vision,
That they do what you want.
yeah, that your vision be fulfilled, or else. If you are out there and you're listening to this and you're like, I've got my vision, I want to fulfill it. Well, there are two routes. You can try and find musicians that will volunteer their time and efforts to fulfill your vision, or you can pay them. And fortunately, in a situation like Soulfly, he probably was able to combine the both. You know, obviously, they were going to go out on a major tour and all that, but the fact that he was able to bring these guys in and pay them what they wanted, you know, that's a huge factor. But he also had the opportunity to
Well, he had a budget from a
he had a
record
budget,
company.
exactly.
Something that's almost non-existent
Budget.
nowadays
Right.
is what we
Budget.
called in those days artist development,
Yeah, I
where
think I think
a
I've heard
record
of that.
company would shell out actual money
Right.
to develop an
Money.
artist. They'd take a chance on developing a band that they thought might pay off for them, and then let them go at it.
Yeah.
Now, oftentimes with that came the constraints of an A&R guy being with you at every moment because it was his ass on the line.
Yeah, you're not kidding.
And Indigo was one of those off the beaten track places where bands that would normally have had an A&R guy show up 6 days a week not want to drive out there, and they'd be pretty much left to their own doings.
Yeah.
Or undoings.
Or if they were a famous band, there were bands that just straight told, one that comes prominently to mind would be like Neil Young and his producer David Briggs through most of his career, who would just tell the record company, stay away, or, if you come up here, you're not going to find us working.
Stay away.
You can come up and, bring us some party materials.
Yeah, and then
but
leave.
don't expect to come up here and,
Dictate the session.
and tell us what to do.
Right.
Yeah, you can't get away with that anymore because, man, like
Artist
nowadays you
development
have to have.
gone. The two-headed dinosaur has chopped itself off in the middle, and that's the
a
record
weird
company with a brain at both ends.
Yeah, we Richard and I, that was another article that I wrote, and we published about why the record industry kind of imploded. And but all that aside is that, yeah, this whole idea of I want to get a major recording contract and then I'll make it. That's not how that works. And
The only thing the labels seem to be pumping anything into these days is pop or a little bit of hip hop there, and on top of that is everything has to be put together before you even go in there. And the only thing you can really use a major now for anyway is their money is for marketing, because with
promotion.
online distribution and with just, I mean, these days you basically, if I was like, say 18 starting out, I would have to be a drummer, singer, guitar player, bassist, composer, engineer, everything. I'd have to have my own home rig to put together my band and to make a decent demo. It's so wild. Now you have to be everything to even get your foot in the door.
Music has lost
Focus.
that thing. Music is really, from Greek, the study of the muses. the knowledge, the mathematics, the fun of playing, and nobody was a professional musician until the invention of records and stuff like that. People played because they liked to play, that it was fun. It would be at parties, they'd gain some notoriety in their village or something like that. But it wasn't to be a superstar
Right.
or
It wasn't for the chicks and the
have
blow.
the big mansion on the hill. It was, you
Rock of
played
Ages.
music because music's fun to play,
Yeah.
and you didn't have to be the world's best player to jam along with guys, where there was a village band that played for holidays or something like that. And the music business basically destroyed that, and then the business itself blew up on them out of their greed. And what are we left with now? People are basically reinventing what is music, what is the music business, what is a band, what is,
yourself.
it all fell apart at one point. And
Well,
the
that's
greedier they got, the worse it got.
that's the thing that everybody in the industry, and at some point, either now or previously, all three of us have been making a living with music. And the thing that I always observe about it these days is that, well, concert attendance is not down. People aren't.
That's where they're
not-
making their money.
Right.
Right.
Well, right. But maybe the vehicle with which it's delivered has changed.
On what level are you
But-
saying? Are you saying concert, dude? Every couple of nights, I'm up on the strip, and there's no one on the strip. There's no one in front of the whiskey. There's no one doing anything, and it's so discouraging. And then I talk to these guys
Because
who
there's
are
no
here.
money. You don't get money for playing at the whiskey.
No, you have to pay to play, but still.
What I'm
Yeah.
talking about is established bands from 20 and
Right.
30 years
Okay.
ago, where it looks like grandpa's up on stage
Survivor.
playing,
Survivor's still strong.
that are, playing
It's a
big
large crowd.
venues
Yeah.
for
Exactly.
$75 to $750 a ticket. And the trouble with that is they've lost their fans because they can't afford to go to the concert of the
Yeah.
band they love. And the hall will be packed with corporate people who where the corporation has bought 30 tickets and given it to the executives, or somehow or another it may have trickled down to a secretary or something, and people are sitting in concerts twiddling their thumbs like something exciting is going to happen, and they don't even know the bands that they've gone out to listen to, yet that's where the bands are making their money. And that's why so many bands are saying, it used to be fun to play live because we had fans that were out in the audience and stomping and
now
dancing
you're just-
and singing along and knew every word to every song, and now we go out to a concert and half the people in the audience don't even know who we are.
Well, yeah.
Yet somebody has spent hundreds of dollars per seat
Yeah,
to
Right.
put them there.
it's true.
No, I'm talking about on a large scale. You are right, Derek, that in LA in particular.
Where's the scene, folks? Let's
Yeah,
get some
something-
bands. Let's revive this place. What's
Yeah,
going
something-
on?
Well, it had such a huge blowout in the 80s with the hair
And-
metal. That was all sunset.
And
you
there
know?
is still a lot of people here that are caught up in
Right.
the whole 80s persona.
That's
You can go
where
out
they
there-
made it, but they didn't make their money there.
No.
They
Exactly.
made their money in the 80s on records. People went out and bought these plastic discs, shelled out
He's
$6.95 or $8.95,
Yeah, more
depending
than
upon
that.
when it was,
Right.
and took it home and dropped a needle on it and listened to it through the speakers. I mean,
Cassettes and CDs.
wherever somebody got the idea that you could yell into a little metal box with a diaphragm in it that vibrates against a condenser and then goes down a wire into some recording console full of unnameable parts, and then gets recorded onto
Yeah.
a piece of tape with some iron rust on it.
Yep.
and then
how it
gets
works.
mixed back down and ends up in a factory somewhere where they're stamping these discs out and sell them. And that's an almost unfathomable process, yet that's where they were making their money, was selling those discs.
Now it's
And then
merchandising.
along came a survey to us producers and engineers in the 80s from the greed of the record companies saying, hey, we got this this digital thing kind of lurking in the background, and what would be the minimum requirements that you as a producer or you as an engineer would accept for this new media if we're thinking of jumping on it? And the unfortunately,
cheaper, faster.
They didn't give us written answers. They gave us A, B, C, D, E to check, and the best specification that you could check was 20 hertz to 20,000 cycles, which was what most equipment was spec'd at. When some scientist in a lab took your hi-fi gear or your microphone or your piece of recording gear into the laboratory and with a bunch of instruments, spec'd it out as having less than, 0.1% distortion from 20 cycles to 20,000 cycles. And that was box E, the best quality. And that's where the 44.1K sampling rate, 16-bit, came from. That was the minimum that they could sample and bit rate that they could follow to meet that 20 to 20,000 spec at that percent of distortion.
Are you saying then, humorously or whatever, that you guys literally were asked to fill out a form that had to do with the demise of
the top
the record industry?
Top couple hundred producers and engineers were sent in the mail this survey to fill out. And
we blame you.
It's all your fault.
No,
Shame,
a
sir.
lot of us with any kind of integrity put on there,
you
haven't met the criteria because the human ear, although it can't on a hearing test, where they're putting a tone in your ear in the ear doctor's office, can't hear much past 20,000, but you can tell when it's missing. You can clearly hear up to 30,000 or so when it goes away.
The digital medium can't deal with that.
My tape machines were, you could feed tones through them up to about 35,000 cycles and get honest playback of them.
Right.
And when you filtered out that last 15,000 cycles, you noticed it's missing. It's like people who say, oh, there's no difference between 40-degree weather and 10-degree weather. Once it gets below 40, it's just plain cold.
Bastard cold.
Not true.
They've never lived in a cold climate.
Right.
They've never lived where the difference between 0 and minus 30.
I know, and we've talked about
the same differences between 60 and 90, which is very easily discernible to anybody. And the same thing happens with music. When you take away that huge couple of octaves at the top and bottom, you notice it missing, and it interferes with the placement in the spectrum of where the instruments are, and the reverb and all the little subtle effects and things like that disappear when you do that to the music. And there was a reason why they wanted to go to this digital thing.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the executives of the record company saying to me, well, first off, if we can sell the people on CDs, we can sell them for twice as much.
Right.
People will think it's a new, better media. and we can
and then
change the price from being $7.95 to being
20,
$16.95 or $18.95. So we'll make twice as much money. They cost half as much to actually make. We put it in a smaller packaging, which costs us a quarter as much, and we're going to be able to. And best of all, nobody will ever be able to make a copy, because do that, you'd have to have a laser.
No, but it goes even further than that, because
MP3s.
3 years later, every
hold on.
6-year-old kid had a laser diode in his CD burner on his computer and was making copies by the hundreds.
But it goes even further, because when they came out with the CD, you couldn't, you could with cassettes, you could with albums, you didn't have to release a single. So the person had to buy the whole $16 CD, even if that band had no artist development behind them and had one great song and 10 weak songs. You were still stuck.
I picked up a few CD singles along the way, but it was
later.
A few, but
that was
not,
later.
Steven's basically right. There weren't many, and they thought that nobody'd ever be able to copy them.
Right.
But what happened is the worst case scenario. Not only 3 years later was everybody demanding a CD writer to be in their computer, their home computer, but when you made a copy of a record or a cassette, you had a generation loss. So the copy wasn't as good as the original.
It's like taping something off the radio.
When it came to the digital, selling digital material on CDs or whatever, laser discs, when you made a copy, the copy was exactly the same.
Yeah.
There was no generation loss. There was no extra hiss. There was no loss of bandwidth or anything. What happened was you got a one-to-one exact copy, and that's what killed the record companies, because you could then pirate it.
Yeah.
And piracy made it such that the only place these bands could make any money was in live performances and merchandising.
Yeah. Well, to me, all three of us.
Every copy protection scheme failed.
It's not been. I mean, the three of us have experienced it. The studios have closed. But I think that's where I was kind of going back to concert attendance, maybe on your larger bands, your larger concerts, venues, and all that. Is that people have not stopped showing up, even though the model has changed so significantly. People have not lost interest in their popular forms of entertainment, and that's hope. That's hope for the musician or the band guy that wants to start, or girl that wants to start a band.
Yes.
That doesn't necessarily want to go out and be the next Beyonce. There is still hope. It's just that the model has changed significantly.
We're a long way from Soulfly.
This is our thing. We're going to talk about the band for 5 minutes.
I can make a copy of their CD if I want.
Yeah, you can.
I can too.
But the fact of the matter is, the whole point of these podcasts is to talk about these unbelievable collections of musicians, guys who love to play, who are great musicians, who put out albums. We were fortunate enough to have our hand in and to be graced with the good fortune of being on scene to make these albums, and that's what these podcasts are about. I know we've strayed a long way from Soulfly, but I will say one thing: Soulfly did become a success without Sepultura. Sepultura continued on as a success without Max. They had talked about reuniting at some point. It never happened, to my knowledge. And the fact of the matter is, music is music. Great music is great music. A great recording of a bad song will never sell as well as a bad recording of a great song. And here we have bands that have great recordings of great songs, and how lucky we both as professionals in the music business and as listeners were to be in this era. I mean, think about 100 years ago, 1913. What did you do to get a piece of music that you loved? Maybe you had an Edison disc or a Victrola or something like that, and you stood around the acoustic, non-amplified cone that came out from the needle that dragged along the record, to today, where you have this incredible competition of audiophile equipment, and even the average person has a big collection of music. Just the average guy has playback and a music collection that's greater than anybody ever had 50 or 100 years ago. The worst equipment of today sounds better than the best equipment that anybody even thought of back then. You can buy a $100 Kmart or Walmart playback system that sounds unbelievably good and play records and music of every sort on it that was never even imagined years ago. So, what a generation to be in.
Yeah, no, it's you're right. And for the listener and the viewer, we're talking about something that is, as Richard and Derek have said in the past, is both opinion and fact, and if you disagree with us, great. Go online and let us know.
But
and
we're right.
And
that's that, and this is ours, and you're out of here, mister.
Yeah. And come online and
we'd be glad to erase your comments. But no,
and then
the fact of the matter is,
block you. No,
we don't know any. A 4-year-old kid can tell you more about whether a song is good than most opinionated adults, which is why oftentimes, even in the studio, and again with somebody like Max and Gloria having kids that came into the studio and would listen to the songs and make comments about them, and we took those comments to heart, because a kid isn't hiding anything. They aren't in there because they want to make some comment that's going to make them famous. They're doing this because they know music, they know what sounds good, they know what they like, they know what they enjoy, they know what makes them feel good, and they're not afraid to express it.
That's perfect. That's a perfect comment to wrap on.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
that was really nice. It's true.
All right, well,
very true.
We have strayed, but we've also offered some opinions, and you can take them or leave them, but let us know what you think. www.facebook.com/StudioRatHQ. Here we are on YouTube, www.youtube.com/StudioRatHQ.com. The website, StudioRatHQ.com, and Podomatic. Just do a search for Studio Rat HQ, and we will keep coming back with different podcasts of different genres. We are coming near the end of the new metal, heavy metal genre within Indigo Ranches.
We could do dozens more, but I think we're going to probably, at least, we may do a couple more heavy metal ones.
Okay.
I can think of a few that
Machine Head.
do need to do. Machine Head, Limp Bizkit.
Oh, definitely Limp Bizkit.
And a number of others. Indigo had also the good fortune of doing
Megadeth.
For
War
anybody
is my
who's...
business, and business is good.
Mm-hmm.
We had the good fortune of doing a number of heavy albums, a number of jazz albums, a number of classic rock albums, and we're going to start doing different genres, but don't despair. We'll keep coming back to your favorite genre,
Whether you like it
no
or
matter
not,
what it is.
we will be here.
And
Same bad time.
We may
Same
even
bad
do a
channel.
Bing Crosby session.
the Bing Crosby would be great. And also,
Yeah,
you know,
I'm excited for that one.
Derek has mentioned we also know a lot of people in the community, and they're still working like we are in recording and production. We might even bring them in. So it's constantly going to morph. This is Stephen Couch with Derek Jablonski and Richard Kaplan. As always, guys, an honor to listen and talk with you. And we'll see you in the upcoming weeks. So thanks again, everybody.
Thank you, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year again. Thank you. Goodbye.